started questioning everything, about myself. What does this mean? Why am I being plagued by the worst possible things that could happen to, my precious little baby? The idea was, you can protect your baby from all the dangers in the world, but what if you're the danger and you don't know it? And that was it. Someone in work, it's your sister, it's your best friend, it's your daughter, your girlfriend, it's going to be someone that you know.
Hi everyone, welcome back to the Big Fat Question podcast. My name's Anna, and today's Big Fat Question: what does having OCD feel like? To help me answer this question, I am over the moon to be joined by the incredible Kimberley Nixon. Kim, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
No problem at all. So Kim, you've been pretty open online about your story about living with OCD, and particularly the OCD that you've experienced since becoming a mother to your little boy. I just wanted to talk a little bit about your journey, basically, first. So OCD, or obsessive compulsive disorder, is a really complex illness. It comes in many different forms. And I think due to sort of the nature of the disease, lack of awareness about it can be really isolating for the sufferer, which is why I think it's so important to sort of do things like this. So grateful that you've come on. First of all, I just wanted to say, as a young person growing up, what did you think OCD was, and how does this compare to what you now know about the disease?
That's a really good question, because I was very much I never ever aligned myself with OCD. I obviously had it the whole time I was kind of growing up. But I never, my knowledge of OCD was what I'd seen in films and TV stuff, Sorry, one sec.
That's okay, don't worry.
Let me have a joke. So, yeah, my knowledge of OCD was really what I'd seen in films and TV shows and things, which was hand washing, light switch checking, oven checking, that kind of very visible, becoming extremely distressed if things weren't in the right order or arranged by height, or that was kind of, and none of those subtypes ever applied to me. The kind of germophobia, all that kind of stuff was it never crossed my mind that I had OCD ever, from depictions I'd seen of it. And then when I had a really bad episode after having my little boy, again, in the beginning, that didn't even crop up. It wasn't even on my radar. I didn't know that postnatal OCD was even a possibility. I didn't know that was an option. So I wasn't quite fitting into postnatal depression boxes at all. It wasn't really fitting my symptoms, which just added to my distress and my alarm, because it was kind of like, oh my God, there's something really wrong with me. I haven't even got the normal.
Yeah.
I haven't got the normal postnatal mental illnesses. I'm not ticking any of these boxes. And then when I finally came across someone's count of their postnatal OCD, and it was tick, 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 that I could finally say to a medical professional, it's this. And then I got on the right journey or the right pathway to the right treatment. Yeah. Which is the thing with OCD. I think that if it's characterized as other things like depression or anxiety, then you can go down a route of treatment that actually exacerbates it. Like talking therapies and things, So the absolute worst thing for me, which is what happened in the beginning, was to talk about the content of my thoughts and what does that mean, and all of that kind of thing, because that was the problem. It wasn't the thoughts I was having, because everyone has intrusive thoughts. Everyone gets random mad thoughts pass through their mind. You get 17,000 a day or something.
Wow.
The problem with someone with OCD is that they stick. An odd one will stick, and you'll ruminate, and you'll loop and loop and loop on it. So then going to a medical professional who's going, oh, why do you think that you thought these awful things? And what do you think that says about you? It's literally the worst kind of treatment.
Yeah, Yeah. I mean, you were saying about like you saw on, do you say you saw on social media that somebody had very similar to symptoms and you're ticking the boxes, like,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, I had to really find, I didn't find it for a long time. There was one, I think it was on the Mind website.
Oh yeah. Mm.
And it was just someone so brave who I think they were anonymous, and I'm forever grateful to them. But they very explicitly wrote down, you know, the types of the very real symptoms of postnatal OCD, and it was the first glimmer of light that there was someone else out there that had this. Because for the best part of the year after having my son, I didn't know what was happening to me, and it was just compounding it. I was so frightened, I was so terrified, and the more I tried to get rid of the thoughts, the harder they came, you know.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
Finding that one little article that kind of pointed me into the direction, and then once I had the OCD diagnosis, it was my husband and I we were just absolutely kicking ourselves, because it was like, how did we not see that? Like, we're two quite bright people, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Oh.
We're relatively like, you know, I've always been very like aware of my mental health. I've always had like little like episodes of like depression or anxiety, but I didn't really. I was having episodes of OCD, and because of
Mm.
those OCD episodes, I was feeling depressed and anxious.
Mm.
Um, but I just ticked every single box, and it was just, and it was just, there was no link for me before that I could possibly have OCD.
Mm.
If you'd have
Yeah.
suggested that, I'd be like, no, I'm not particularly, I'm quite messy.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah.
Germs don't really bother me. You know, especially with a newborn baby, there's just all kinds of fluids, you know, you're just vomiting and poo and wee
Yeah.
and all sorts, you know, and I was never squeamish about any of that stuff.
Yeah.
But then and my compulsions are largely invisible, so I do them mentally. So again, that there wasn't that, I don't know, there wasn't that kind of like clangor, there wasn't that,
Yeah.
which is why I think when I got better, I wanted to talk about it more,
Mm.
to let more people know that they weren't alone, and that OCD isn't what you think it is.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I just think, I mean, obviously the internet has its flaws and social media, but God, in terms of mental illness information and just like networking, I think it's so just like invaluable. Like, it's just incredible
Mm.
that you can just click a few buttons and there's someone who's just, you think, yeah, it all makes sense. Like the light bulb goes on. And, you know, it's so nice that you can now be that person for somebody else. And obviously we will talk about that a little bit later about your podcast and everything. Yeah, so obviously you talked a little bit about intrusive thoughts and saying obviously everybody gets them, but for someone with OCD it's about rumination, which is spiraling. I believe it's sort of like when something sticks and you keep thinking about it,
Yeah.
and obviously terrifying to experience, but I guess even scarier to tell someone about, as you said, due to sort of the nature of the thoughts. If obviously you feel comfortable talking about it, I wonder if you wouldn't mind sort of saying what like a particularly bad day would look like with this illness.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Um, I always talk about the kind of the themes around the intrusive thoughts. I don't particularly, I mean, because there are so many particular thoughts and images that made me spiral. I don't always talk explicitly about the content of them, because one, I've learned that doesn't matter. The content of the thought doesn't matter. It's my reaction to it that does.
Mm.
And two, I don't like to give other OCD sufferers any ideas.
Yeah,
because our OCD brains are just like scoping out for anything that they can like grab onto. So I don't want to add to anyone else's thing, but I will say that I'd obviously had them all my life. I'd get stuck on things, and I never quite understood as a kid why I sometimes couldn't control my brain in a way that I in other times was fine. So sometimes my brain was fine and it would let things come in and out, and I could just live my life. And other times I couldn't stop thinking about one image or one sentence, or and I would replay it over and over and over and over and over again, like a stuck CD. And I would try and solve it, and I would try and analyze it. So I'd always had that, but I just thought maybe I just had a slightly quirky brain or something. Then what happened with my son? So it was October 2020. It was the thick of COVID. I had him off the back of IVF. So, you know, he was so wanted. We'd had a really tough time trying to conceive, and then we did, and then he was here. And everything started to go a bit wrong at the birth. Quite rapidly, things went wrong. I started kind of bleeding out. I had two blood transfusions. They whisked the baby away to the special baby unit. And because of COVID, they said to my husband, you can only go with one of them, but you can't go back to the other. So I was obviously, go with the baby, and just text me and keep me up to date. And as soon as he was born, something started happening inside that I couldn't quite understand. And I think now looking back and being objective about it, I think a large part of it was the huge hormone plummet that you have as soon as you're not pregnant anymore. Plus the kind of the trauma of the birth and the, you know, the kind of life and death situation of it, and the huge life change. And you're now I remember that the staff started calling me mum straight away as soon as he was out, and that really freaked me out because it wasn't something that I recognized. It's like 30 seconds ago you weren't calling me mum. And it felt like the light started to go out, and I just started spiraling, and I spent that whole first night lying in a room kind of staring at the ceiling, and I couldn't move because of the operation that they'd done, and the baby had been taken away, and my husband couldn't see me. And I just convinced myself that the baby wasn't going to make it. So every time the door opened, I was ready for them to come in and say, I'm very, very sorry, but you know, and I just geared myself up for that, basically. And I never quite got out of it after that. So even when I was reunited with the baby, and then we had to stay in for days by ourselves, and it was a really horrible experience. But even when I got home, this idea that I couldn't ever get too comfortable because it was that he was going to be taken away somehow, that something was going to happen to him, he was going to become ill, I would make a mistake in caring for him somehow because I didn't know what I was doing. And it just festered, and it just started, and over the next few months, it started to manifest itself in bizarre rules and things that I would put in place. So like if he cried, I gave myself 10 seconds to get to him, and I would count in my head. And if I didn't get to him within 10 seconds, then something terrible was going to happen. Or I think I'd read somewhere, that babies can feel abandoned if you don't get to them within a certain time, and all this kind of thing. And I was just so terrified of anything going wrong. And so it just built and built on there. And I just started behaving differently. So my husband would notice. I was absolutely convinced that everything was a danger to my baby. And so I was constantly risk assessing and ruminating. And I was seeing what started to make me think I was losing my mind was that I would see perfectly in such graphic, vivid detail, kind of 3 or 4 seconds into the future. So if I was changing the baby on the table, I could perfectly see in about 4 seconds time what happens if he would roll off and hit the kitchen tiles. And I could hear it, and I could see it, and it sort of made me catatonic. I would just freeze because I was so terrified of this like dual thing. I was seeing real life as it was happening, and then I was seeing this horrible future that I needed to prevent. And I stopped sleeping. I wasn't taking care of myself in the same way. I started questioning everything, about myself. What does this mean? Why am I being plagued by the worst possible things that could happen to, my precious little baby? And eventually it morphed into, I think I'd done um so many risk assessment things, and I'd done everything that I possibly could to save the baby. And then this idea pinged into my mind, and then that was it. And the idea was, you can protect your baby from all the dangers in the world, but what if you're the danger and you don't know it? And that just, that was it. That was it. That sent me the idea that I could be a danger to my baby and not be aware of it. How can I protect my baby from myself if I don't? So, what if I was bathing him and I accidentally did something? Or what if I was asleep and I rolled over and smothered him? Or, it was just so that, oh, I won't sleep then. Okay, I won't sleep then. I'll make sure someone's in the room with me when I'm bathing him then. It was putting all these things in place. But I think what really ruined me, I think, and actually just broke me and broke my heart, was the idea that, why are you thinking like this? What kind of a person thinks like this? What kind of a mother thinks like this? And are you deep down an absolute monster, but you don't even know it? And you could snap at any moment. And trying to stay one step ahead of that for the best part of like 18 months.
Wow. Yeah, I was going to ask how long, but yeah.
Of like every single minute of every single day, I didn't think about anything else. There was no joy. I couldn't watch TV. I couldn't read a book. There was nothing. I was just seeing 24/7, like Clockwork Orange, horror films. And then I became the sort of star of those horror films. And it threw me so much. That OCD makes you believe it. It makes you believe that you are that. And so for this year and a half, I convinced myself that I was a monster, that I was an absolute monster, and that I was in some way going to harm my baby, and and I couldn't live with myself. I just couldn't live with myself if that was the truth. I kept saying that. What if it's the truth? What if it's the truth? And my husband would be like, and we'll come on to people who live with people who have OCD,
Yeah.
The more they try to help sometimes, the more. So I would constantly be seeking reassurance. Like, just because I saw this image doesn't mean it's going to happen, does it? Just because I thought this doesn't mean I'm going to do that, does it? Just constant questioning, and their reassurance is never enough. It's never enough.
Yeah.
Because how do you know? How do you know? How do you know I won't just snap? And then in the end, they go, well, I don't know that you won't just snap, but you probably won't. It's like, oh my God, okay, so you think I will as well. Okay.
Yeah.
And it's kind of endless. So, and I became very, very unwell. That was my whole entire existence. Yet through it, continued to look after my baby, which now I look back is sort of amazing. But at the time, it was like, I knew that if I stopped for one day, I'd never go back. Because imagine being with your baby and you've wanted this baby for such a long time and you love them so all-consumingly. But the idea of touching them or picking them up or doing anything like that, everything in your body is screaming at you to not do it because it's dangerous. If you pick him up, you might drop him. If you change him, you might accidentally do something inappropriate. If you bath him, he might slip under the water and you might not get him out in time. What if I snap and he's under the water and I come to kind of 20 seconds later, it's too late. It was all this stuff all the time, relentlessly bombarding me. So I didn't sleep. I became very, very unwell. And I think the treatment that I first got was, oh, you've got postnatal depression. Let's do some talking therapy. And then it was kind of like, so why do you think you're having these terrible thoughts about, and now that I've educated myself on it, and now I'm 3 years down the line, I know how common it is. I know how intrusive thoughts in pregnancy and in early parenthood are unbelievably common. It's like something like 96% or something of people, you know,
Yeah.
of course you do, because
Mm,
you've suddenly got this huge new responsibility and you're risk assessing all the time.
mm,
You know, are they too hot? Are they too cold? Is this milk the right temperature? Are they sleeping enough or too much? Or, you know, it's that. And then you add in an OCD brain, and it's on top of a sort of traumatic experience. I think it's just a recipe for disaster.
mm. Yeah. And I mean, like you said, I think something like 1 in 5 women experience some sort of mental health issue, either when they're pregnant or after a child's born, which is so many, like there's so many,
Yes,
um,
yes.
which is
It's
crazy.
so many,
And
it's so many women that you'll know.
yeah,
It's someone in work. It's your sister. It's
mm,
your best friend. It's your daughter, your girlfriend. It's going to be someone that you know
mm,
gets hit with it. And I think that the thing that distinguishes it from maybe other mental health episodes that you'll have in your life is that suddenly now you have this tiny vulnerable baby.
mm,
And of course, all the focus switches as soon as you're pregnant. Everyone's looking after you, and they care. You know, everyone's making sure you're healthy and your well-being. And then as soon as the baby's here, it switches to the baby, which of course it would. But the
mm,
mum kind of gets pushed to the side.
mm,
And actually, you know, there's that idea of the fourth trimester,
mm,
um, that those 3 months after pregnancy, the hardest part of pregnancy for me was the 3 months after pregnancy, um, because your body is literally repairing and knitting itself back together, and you know where your womb has held a baby in it now it has to try and shrink back down to like the size of a pea or something,
yeah,
and physically you're dealing with all of that on top of trying to care for a very, very vulnerable tiny, you know, a baby that can't look after themselves.
mm,
And there seemed to be no focus on the mental and emotional shift
mm,
that a mother goes through in those few. I wasn't expecting it. I was very aware of my tendency to kind of get very anxious or a bit depressed. And so when I was pregnant, I had a great pregnancy apart from morning sickness, which was the worst.
yeah,
But I sort of signed myself up to perinatal mental health during my pregnancy as a sort of like a precaution.
mm,
And I had a great pregnancy and I was so mentally ready, I felt.
mm, mm,
Um, and the night before, you know, my husband and I had been together a really long time, and we realized it was the last night that we were going to have as just the two of us. And we had a curry, we watched a Marvel film.
yeah,
And we were so, everything was there for him, his cot, his Moses bath. You know, we were just, there was a baby shaped hole in the house and we were
mm,
waiting to fill it. And then that next day, literally, I remember they did, it kind of turned into an emergency. So in the C-section, they lifted him up and I saw him, and I remember looking up at him, and there's, you know, the kind of scary theater lights. But
yeah,
I did have that amazing moment of, oh my God, that's my baby. That's my baby in the real world. Like I've spent so many time with other people's babies and nieces and nephews, but that's my baby, like the baby that we've been trying for and that we nearly lost earlier in the pregnancy, and he's here. And then crash. It
mm,
just crashed, and it never reset after that.
mm. Yeah. I mean, I was talking about like sort of unmet needs. I think there's so many unmet needs for women's physical health, but also mental health, especially after having a baby. Um,
Mm.
and you spoke a little bit about your postnatal care and how it wasn't really adequate at the start at all. And what's are some ways that you would improve peri or postnatal care for women in that position, after being through it? You know, what sort of things would you change?
Um, that's a really That's a really complex question, because I'm almost certain that if the exact same thing happened to me, right, if I had a baby today and the exact same thing happened, that all the same protocols are in place, that the same experience would happen to me. I think we've got a huge problem with the NHS with basically with waiting lists.
Yeah.
You know, a mental health crisis is quite an immediate thing, and them saying, well, in 6 weeks you can have a group Zoom call. Isn't helpful for anyone. You know, I got offered leaflets a lot, which would take about 8 weeks to arrive in the post.
Yeah.
It was a lot of box ticking, and it was kind of like flow charts. They'd have like a flow chart, and you know, even for OCD, when it finally was on the radar, it would be like, well, do you check locks? No. Do you check the oven? No. And it was almost this feeling of like, can you just say yes, and then I can move on to the next, I can move down the flow chart and get you to the right help. So that's why I wanted to like raise more awareness about what is sort of coined pure O, the idea that most of your compulsions or your rituals are mental, and that they're invisible to other people. Because that was everything I was doing. So I was having these obsessions, and I was doing these compulsions to minimize the risk of the obsessions, but it was all in my mind. It was largely invisible, apart from when obviously, you know, you start to look like you're very unwell because you're not sleeping and you're not eating and you're absolutely traumatized. But that made the treatment even harder, because how do I stop my mind from doing? It's not the same as, I was like, if I had the hand washing compulsion, I could like sit on my hands. I could tie my hands up and physically stop it. How do I stop myself clinging on? Like, I don't know how to control my brain in that way. And so that was the really scary, I'm never going to get better, there's no hope for me. And then until I really engage with ERP, so exposure response prevention, until I properly engage with that, then I started to get better. But I would say that the two main things for me is that I was with perinatal mental health. There are four main, fairly common perinatal mental health conditions. So there's postnatal depression, which people have heard of. There's postnatal anxiety, which you can understand. Postpartum psychosis, which is obviously very dangerous, where you're having delusions, and there is an actual danger to the baby because you're delusional and your mind is telling you to do things, you know. And so I didn't have any of those things. I wasn't ticking any of those things. And the fourth one, which is extremely common, is postnatal OCD, and I had never heard of it. I'd read all the baby books. I was with perinatal OCD through my perinatal mental health through my pregnancy. I'd never ever heard of it. And so from the start, when I was very, very honest with mental health professionals or medical professionals, I was very honest from the start, because I knew that was how I would get better. So I was like, I'm having these, and I'd never heard the phrase intrusive thoughts. When I first read that online, my whole world opened up, because it explained everything about who I was and how I was. I'd never even heard that phrase. So which is why I kind of put the hashtag on most things that I do on Instagram, because to get that phrase out there, that it does have a name. There's a name for it. But so I was explaining these symptoms, and the trauma of having to tell strangers over and over again, and a different stranger every time. You never saw the same person twice. The worst, darkest, scariest parts of your brain revolving around your baby. So you're terrified your baby's going to be taken away from you. You're terrified that you're going to be arrested or sectioned, and all of these, you're just so terrified. But I kind of pushed through and was honest. And at no point was it ever made clear to me that these things are common, that these things are, that everyone has these. I very much got the reaction from most people, not all, because some were great, but most, that it made me feel like even more of a freak. It made me feel like, oh wow, they're the medical professionals with all the knowledge, and even they don't know what to do with me. I must be really bad. And it scares you because you're looking to them like, please cure me, please stop this from happening. I want to go back to how I was before. I want to be normal, Kim. I want to be a great mum like I thought I was going to be, and all these things. So it's difficult because I say for OCD, you shouldn't ask for reassurance. You should be able to sit with the uncertainty. But when I say reassurance in this context, I mean, from a medical point of view, them saying these are highly common symptoms. You're not the medical marvel you think you are. And that never happened until I finally found a really good OCD therapist. And it was all kind of, and I've done so much reading about it myself. It's so common. It's so common. And I'd never heard of any other woman ever talking about it. And so I was convinced I was the first. That I was the first mother in the history of like, in the world. And part of that then is shame and guilt and hiding it and trying to hide it as much as possible because you're absolutely terrified what people will think. So I would like there to be a better understanding of the 4 different types of postnatal mental health. That postnatal depression isn't a catch-all for everything, and that people don't always tick all those boxes. It's not the kind of umbrella thing that they think it is. And that, I don't know, take some of the fear out, take some of the mystique out, you know, of course you'll have scary thoughts after you've just had a baby. You're now a parent responsible for a tiny baby, and you've just been through the biggest physical, mental, and emotional thing you'll ever go through in your entire life. Of course your brain's trying to reset and everything. And so what my brain did was it went into kind of old habits of, okay, we know what to do here. We know what to do. Everyone panic, battle stations. And so I think just a better sort of education, not just for the sort of pregnant woman and the, you know, but also I was dealing with perinatal mental health people who hadn't heard of postnatal OCD, and it's one of the 4 main common things. And so you're coming up against, and so because I was like actively trying to learn as much about it as possible because I wanted to get better, it got to a point where I knew more than they did, and that's really frightening because I don't know, you kind of look at people in the medical profession as sort of
they know all, and
they know all, and that you can help me. And then when you get to a point in an appointment where it's, oh no, oh no, I know more about this than you, and that's, oh no, that's really bad because that means you can't help me, and then it makes you spiral. A big thing for me was, like I said, as soon as it must be a policy or something, I don't know, but as soon as you give birth, I mean, it'd be mum in most places, but I gave birth in Wales, so it was mam. And as soon as everyone started calling me mam, they all did. And then for the whole of my hospital stay, it was like, cup of tea, mam, would you like, you know, I completely ceased to have my own identity. I wasn't called Kim anymore. I was sort of lumped in. We were all just I don't know, we sort of felt like hens or something. It was like, and then it's sort of continued as my son deals with any health visitors or nurseries and things like that. I'm mam all the time. And I found that a really weird loss of identity. It was and it was really frightening because I thought I was a terrible mum, and you keep calling me mum. And that was freaking me out even more. Like, stop calling me that because I'm trying to deal with being one. You keep calling me that.
Yeah, but I guess it must be kind of uncomfortable to say, don't call me mum, you know, when you're in a you know, in a clinic with other doctors.
It's like my name's Kim. It's like
Yeah.
you're freaking me.
Yeah.
But the other thing I would say that I would like to see change, and you think this was obvious, but it wasn't, was the kind of ask twice philosophy. So I didn't understand that a lot of the time when a doctor or a nurse or a midwife or a health visitor would say, you know, hi, how are you today? And you go, yeah, fine, thanks, how are you? And they go, yeah, great. That was your mental health checkup. Whereas you thought that was just that's just British,
Being nice. Yeah. Yeah. God.
British polite opening statements, you know, everything. Yeah, hi, how are you? Oh, I'm good, thanks. How are you? Everyone says that. You could be going through the worst time in your entire life, and you go, oh, I'm fine, thanks. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that idea of going, no, how are you really? Or because if anyone would have done that in those first few days in hospital, I would have just broken down and I would have gone, I don't know what's happening to me. And because it was also very polite, it was just very strange. It was your mental. It was just a tick box. It was like I asked mum if she was all right. She said yes. So showing no signs of postnatal mental health problems. You know, it was that kind of thing. It was like I wasn't asked any of that stuff. I was just sort of said good morning to how are you? Fine, thanks. You know, and so I think I've got this thing with like new mums, like always, well, with anyone really, but ask twice, you know, when you see a mum and say, how you doing? And they always go, yeah, tired, but fine, thanks. Because you do, because it's polite, because that's what we've been brought up to do. And actually, if you go, how are you really doing? And they go, I'm finding it really hard. I'm finding it really hard. And no one told me about this bit. And I read all the baby books, but I'm feeling so many more things than those books could ever convey. And it's really scary. And I think I'm rubbish at it. And yeah, it was all suddenly the floodgates open and you get some honesty. And as soon as people start talking like that, they start to feel better because they start to feel less isolated, less alone, less scared. And then that's where recovery can start to happen. You know, when I was very, very ill, I had this very strong sense of I have to get better to be able to get better. So I just needed to get a tiny bit better so that I could start to actually engage with therapy and actually, because I was in such a sort of just in a constant state of my mind, I was manic. My mind was whizzing, you know, I was seeing horrendous things all the time. I would be having a conversation like this and talking to you. But no. I'd be having a conversation like normal to you, and I could be chatting and going, yeah. And at the same time, simultaneously seeing an absolute horror film. And I became very good at masking that so that you couldn't tell. So the horror was going on and I'd still be nodding and smiling. It's very frightening. And I think that the biggest thing for me was that I didn't know what was happening. I didn't know any of it had a name. I didn't know. I thought my life was over. I really did. I thought something's happened. It almost feels magical. It almost feels like you've been cursed or something, that someone's sort of cast a spell on you, and that yesterday you were fine and today you're in a constant state of purgatory. And that went on for a really, really long time.
I mean, that, yeah. And I think that's sort of also the magical feeling of finding out that somebody has these same symptoms as you as well. I mean,
yeah.
Talking about support systems, obviously you have an incredible podcast, Influencing My Brain, which is a great name, by the way, guys.
It's such a bad name.
It's so good. It's so good. And you often talk about your experiences on Instagram, which, you know, I've obviously said to you before, but having a close person to me suffer with intrusive thoughts, it's done so much. And, you know, I think more than you'll ever know, really. And you also share messages from people that you've helped, which must be really lovely. When did you sort of think, because obviously it's, like you said, such a frightening thing to experience, when did you sort of think, right, it's time for me to put this on a platform? Because again, it must be so scary to be like, right now strangers are gonna hear about this, and you know.
It honestly wasn't, it was in no way a sort of like selfless, brave act of like, I'm sometimes on the TV, so I'm going to use my inverted commas platform to share this thing. It wasn't anything like that. It was, I literally started it in the middle of the night when my had a little, he was, I don't know, he must have been like, how old would he have been? I don't know, he was past the year, so maybe like 18 months old, but he'd been really unwell. And so you're up all night. And I sort of started it in the middle of the night, completely sleep deprived. But the idea when I first went on Instagram, so the influence I was making a TV show, and everyone else, all the other actors were on Instagram, and they said you should go on Instagram, and I was like, I really don't want to go on Instagram. I was like, it's not my cup of tea at all. I don't do posh lunches and post bikini pictures, like I'm not, whatever. And they were like, yeah, and I always came into work in dungarees, and they were like, yeah, but well, you could get free dungarees, if you went on there. I was like, what, really? And they were like, yeah. So that's how it started. It became a joke that I'd be like, I've been on Instagram for a week and I haven't had one free dungaree, so I don't know what's happening.
Yeah, I don't know what that is. I mean, I don't know who told you that.
I still haven't. Not a whiff.
Not heard of that. Yeah.
And I kind of really didn't like it on there. And then slowly I became so unwell that I didn't care anymore. Like for me, my life had a sort of expiration date, if you know what I mean. It wasn't like a solid date. It was just this idea that I wasn't going to last very much longer. If I could get to my son's first birthday, then that would be really good. It was putting things in place almost. It was setting my husband and my son up to be able to thrive and survive without me. And this was all kind of not consciously done. I wasn't going about doing it like, because I'm going to take that way out. It wasn't that. It was just this idea that I can't live like this forever. I can't. And it had been such a long time with no relenting, and it was just getting worse, if anything. So there was this idea that, well, something's going to happen, because I can't possibly 24/7 live with these intrusive thoughts and rumination and feel this wretched all the time. So I'll do what I can while I'm here and make it as easy for everyone. And so there was, so I didn't have anything to worry about in that regard. So it was like I started to be a bit more honest on Instagram, because all I was seeing was like were brand new mothers all dressed in white with full face of makeup and a blow dry, and 2 days later they were size 8 walking through the park with a latte, and they were all going on about how they'd fallen in love at first sight with their baby, and that and now they felt complete. And it was all this really foreign stuff that didn't remotely chime with my experience. And so I started just to put a few things out there, and then the more I did, the more messages I got. And over the past 2 years, I've had thousands of messages from people just going, thank God. Or I didn't realize how unwell I was at the time. Or the best ones I get the best ones for me are, today I went to my GP and told them something, because I thought, well, if that girl off the TV is going through it and talking about it, then I can go and tell the GP. And I'm signed up for therapy, and I've started some medication, and I've told my family and all these things. And that was all I'd ever really wanted. But it wasn't this like altruistic, like, oh, I'm going to use my platform to, it was just like, I didn't have anything to lose. I didn't have anything to lose, because I wasn't sure how much longer I was going to be around, because of how frightened, how relentlessly frightened I was. And we're going on to sorry, let me just let the dog out.
Okay, don't worry.
Sorry, she needs a wee. Yeah, it was more, it was like, it's not like I've got a future career to ruin. It's not like anyone's going to think any less of me, you know, whatever. Just more and more stuff. And I just was being relentlessly honest. And the more I did that, the more I let light in on the shame. And the more I found out who I was, because for a very long time I'd lost that. And the more I shed all those layers of I don't know, walls that you put up, I think maybe especially as a woman going through your 20s and early 30s, and especially maybe in my industry, all these things that you have in place and you're so scared of things. And it was suddenly like I wasn't scared of those things anymore, because I, on a daily basis, was experiencing my worst possible nightmares. So someone calling me fat on the internet or not getting a job, or someone saying I'm ugly or a crap actress or whatever. It was literally, for the first time in my life, water off a duck's back, because it couldn't touch me. Because didn't. Okay. Oh, you think that's a nightmare? I'll show you a nightmare.
Got enough to do.
And so I was so much less afraid of a backlash, basically. Not knowing that opening up on Instagram would be one of the kind of cornerstones of my recovery. I did not see that coming. I will give Instagram that. I didn't see it coming, but this kind of community on there that, like, I've been met with nothing but overwhelming support and compassion and sincerity, and even from people who go, I have absolutely no idea what that's like, or I don't know anyone with that, but it sounds really horrible and I'm really glad you made it through, to, oh my God, that's what's been happening to me. And I didn't know it had a name. And so because I knew how scary it was to talk to mental health professionals about it, or to go to your GP and admit something scary, like I'm having really scary, frightening thoughts around the safety of my baby. So terrifying especially when you're a first-time new mum, because you think some SWAT team's going to come in and take the baby away from you and you'll be arrested, and you know, all the worst case scenarios. So from the little articles I did or the little podcast that I did, a lot of it was like, if you could just take that into the GP, like take one of my stupid little articles into the GP and go, this, I can't say it out loud myself because it's too painful. But this, even if it was that. And so now it's just morphed into this ridiculous influencing my brain. Someone told me I'd be a dungarees influencer, and the name sort of stuck. But
great.
Yeah, it's just, it has morphed into this thing, and I can never go back now. I can never go back to not being truthful. And it's freed up so much of me, so much of my, you know, I was such a sort of, not realizing it, thinking I was a relatively confident, together person, not realizing how sort of sensitive and worried I was about what other people thought about me, about what people thought about my look, all of this sort of stuff. And I've shared so much of that, and I don't think I can ever go back to that. So he just turned 3 a couple of weeks ago, and it really does sort of, it sounds really dramatic, but I am an actress, so that's fine. But it is very much phoenix from the ashes, kind of, you know, when I thought that there was no future for me, to now being this, you know, I'll never be the old Kim. That's all I wanted for such a long time, as I just wanted to go back to how I was before this all happened. And I'm a new Kim now. There's, you know, you can't unlearn those things. But the relationship I have with my little boy is just absolutely wonderful. Like, I was so terrified that I was ruining the bond, but it's none of those things. And now I'm just so honest, and everyone around me knows I have OCD, so I don't have to mask anything anymore. Because that's so exhausting, trying to hide who you are, and trying to pretend to be something that you're not, especially when your job is pretending to be something that you're not. So I was sort of pretending on pretending, and it's exhausting. It's really tiring. And now I'm just unapologetically who I am. And if people don't like that, it doesn't bother me. And it's really freeing.
Yeah. I mean, I just think you're amazing. I know I've said this to you, but you are just so, like, the fact that you can be a voice to someone that can't talk about it, especially the nature of what it is. I just think, yeah, please keep doing what you're doing while you still want to. And yeah, you said about being an actress. Is that, now that you, like you said, phoenix from the ashes, is it a positive outlet for you on difficult days? Obviously, you know, recovery from mental illness isn't a straight line. I think, you know, it's not just you come out of it and
Yeah.
it's done, but does sort of acting, is it a positive outlet for you? Do you find it more difficult, or?
It is now. I think my approach to the industry is completely different. I'm much more kind of ballsy and much more sort of weirdly confident. I'm not the kind of metaphorical wallflower waiting for the call and hoping that hoping that someone liked me in an audition, or hope, that they thought I was skinny enough, or all of these things. I don't care about any of that stuff anymore. That's not interesting to me. It's really boring and time consuming. And so now I'm kind of going after stuff that I want to do. I've been writing a lot more. We've kind of got a TV show, a film, kind of in development. I'm, for a very long time, when I was putting stuff on Instagram about OCD, I was like, you are actively sabotaging your career. Like, no one is going to want to work with you if you put up an OCD episode, or if you put up like people will just think that I'm absolutely nuts, and that and no one's going to want to hire you. But what I've come to realize now is that I've had OCD my entire life, my entire career. Everything you've ever seen me in, I had OCD doing it. And the only difference now is that I know what it is and I know how to look after myself better. So if I could do all those other jobs whilst also trying to mask it, imagine what I could do now when I don't have to do that. So I'm definitely, and also, I've sort of hit rock bottom and the very depths of despair and feeling like you've lost your soul and you're heartbroken. I'm back, and that can only be helpful for understanding different characters.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, it's incredible, Kim. Thank you. And well, I was going to say, what we were saying about it's not a straight line, and I wondered if you had any sort of underrated self-care advice, either for OCD or general mental health related, or for mothers, that you've gotten, or maybe you wish you've gotten, that isn't just sort of talk to someone, look after yourself, which I think are important. But is there anything that you did that you just thought, oh, that I need to sort of, more people
I think
should be doing?
back in the day when I heard the phrase like self-care, I'd sort of roll my eyes a little bit, or self-compassion. But when you honestly think that you are the worst person in the world, that you're a possible monster, that you're everything that would be terrible about being a human being, when you honestly believe that about yourself for such a long time, and you're reiterating it to yourself every minute of the day for like 2 years, it's incredibly hard to, well, why should I brush my teeth? Why should I wash my hair? I don't deserve any of those things. Having clean hair that smelled nice felt like a treat that I absolutely did not deserve. And what if I had a shower and something happened to him while I was in the shower for 5 minutes? What kind of a mother would that make me? And it was all of those sorts of things. And I very much go back to that idea that when I started to get better, when you're on the airplane and they say, when the masks drop down, put yours on before you put it on your kids. And you're kind of like, what? But it's true. There's absolutely no point me putting an oxygen mask on my little boy and then passing out, and there's no one there to help him. And it was exactly the same thing. I can't be a good parent and caregiver and everything he needs me to be unless I'm happy and healthy and taken care of. So taking an hour out to myself is really, really important. And it's not selfish and all these things that we've been made to believe. That it's okay to spend time away from your baby for you, because it makes you better when you're with your baby. And I often find with OCD, one of the hardest things to do it is to voice the intrusive thoughts that you're getting stuck on, because it's so appalling to you. And if you can push through that and say it out loud to yourself in a room, you suddenly hear how ridiculous it is. It takes away its power somehow, and I don't know how, but because it's so ridiculous. And so when my husband catches me, you can see that I'm sort of spiraling a little bit. And I often say things like, "Oh no, I can't. I'm not allowed to do that. I can't do that because I've put these things in place in my mind." And he picks me up on it. What do you mean by that? Oh well, we can't have that nice dinner tonight because I had that really bad thought earlier, and you know, I need to spend time really thinking about that and what that means. And he's like, "Are you hearing yourself?" And if you can just say the actual thought in a sentence, like, "I'm scared that ... and say it. It's so hard. It almost feels like you physically can't. And once you do, it takes away power. And I think that's what's happened with me and Instagram as a sort of modern day soapbox. The more I vocalize things, the more I shed light on things, the less power they have. So I would say just shed more light on things. Don't hide things and let them fester in the dark. Because that's where OCD gets its power from. And the more you open up, the more you share it, the less of a hold it has over you.
I suppose that's good advice as well for someone who is maybe a partner to someone with OCD or close to someone, like just sort of saying, you know, say it out loud. You know, I get if they get to that point and it's comfortable, you know, yeah, it's interesting.
Because I for a long time I actually couldn't say some of the words. I couldn't say them because if I said them in the real world, it would make it true. That was the feeling. And so I would, after therapy and things like that, I would try to talk to my husband, you know, and they'd be like, you have to talk about, you have to vocalize it and talk openly about it, because the content of those thoughts doesn't matter. Your reaction to them does. And he would catch me trying to skirt around the issue or using different words or kind of, oh yeah, you know, that I might sort of do something a bit awful or, you know, whatever. And he'd be like, no, say the words, say the sentence. And you do, and it's almost like for the first time you actually hear it. And it's ridiculous. And why am I worried about that? I mean, that's the thing with OCD from the outside, is that a lot of people are, why are you worried about that? Like, I've known you forever. There is absolutely no way that you're going to snap and become a serial killer. There's no way that's going to happen. You know, there's no way you're going to hurt your baby. I know you. But that doesn't help. That doesn't help us, because we've got so much more what we think of as evidence in our minds that it could be true. So learning to live in the uncertainty, learning to sit with uncomfortable thoughts and feelings and to lower your anxiety, that's been a huge game changer for me.
Yeah, and the brain is just scarily powerful, I think. Like, it's just, unless you are in your brain, you have no idea like what is going on in there.
It's terrifying.
Yeah, and just, you know, briefly, as, you know, someone who, like I said, been very close to someone with OCD, it's hard to know the right things to say, because you know that, like I said, there's literally no way of getting in that brain and turning things off. Is there anything else that you would say, or maybe turn it around, what are the worst things that you could say to someone who's maybe opened up about OCD? Have you had any shockers?
Just, I mean, you get the usual, when you say it to people, you kind of get the flippant comments like, "Oh, if you've got OCD, I'd love you to come around and clean my house," and things like that. Or you're not massively, you're not a neat freak. You're not a, you know, that kind of, you close the door for me? Okay. Sorry.
That's okay.
But you know, you're not this, you're not that, you're not these representation. I don't see you washing your hands or checking switches or counting out loud. You know, I count in my head, I don't count out loud like some people do. And so you get that kind of reaction. Then you get the reaction that's entirely natural from people who love you, going, you don't need to worry about any of that stuff. That is such a waste of your time. Like the possibility of that happening is so small. But the possibility of anything like that happening is where we live. You know, it's if there's a 1% chance, there's a 99% chance. You know, we can't take the risk. That's what it feels like. People with OCD, we can't afford to take the risk, and you have to push through. And so I've certainly had things like that, and then kind of just the basic like mental health stuff of like eye rolling and like, oh, everyone's got something, and all that kind of, everyone's got to have a label these days and blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
But I just say I would never wish for you to see anyone you love go through it, let alone go through it yourself, because it was not only the hardest time in my life, it was the hardest time for my husband, because he was absolutely helpless and powerless. And then when I did start to get better, one of the things that we had to do was, because we'd been doing it our whole relationship, was that he had to stop reassuring me. And it was so cruel because it was the one thing that he has. He felt so helpless during the birth, so helpless afterwards. You know, my mental turmoil, watching his wife become sort of shell of a person, the person that he knew. And the one thing he had was comforting me and telling me that everything was going to be okay. And reassuring me that, no, of course I wouldn't do these terrible things. And of course the baby's safe. And of course. And we had to cut that off at the source. He couldn't reassure me. I had to be able to do that to myself. I had to be able to sort of sit with it. And I will say that was very cruel and horrible, but it's one of the things we saw the biggest changes around. That we got out of the habit of me asking for reassurance. And like last night, someone said something to me. I was like just a little flippant sentence while I was out for dinner, meant absolutely nothing to anybody, but I was ruminating on it, and I caught myself, and I was dying to just double check with my husband what it meant, and did it mean anything, and should I do anything, and I didn't. I sat with how uncomfortable that was, and how scary that was, and I use little blips like that just to practice all the time, because then when a doozy comes along, you're in a better place.
Yeah, well, Kim, I just wanted to finish this to talk a little bit about PANDAS Foundation UK. I think it's really relevant. I know you are, I don't know if you're an ambassador or you just sort of, you talk about it quite a lot.
No, I'm not an ambassador. I just found them to be the one charity that was actually talking to people going through it in a way that felt relevant.
Yeah. And they, could you just talk a little bit about what they do, how we can support them, just to sort of, because I've
sure.
been looking at them really.
So PANDAS, it's like completely volunteer run. You know, they completely rely on donations, which is why if I can do anything for them online, I try to, because the work they do is so fundamental. They're open 365 days a year, so even on Christmas Day, and you can ring them as a mum in distress, whether you're still pregnant, whether you're 2 years postpartum. You can ring them and speak to someone who's gone through something with no judgment. You can say, I'm absolutely terrified that I might hurt my baby, and I'm to the point where I can't live with myself. What do I do? Because I don't want to hurt my baby, but what if I do it what if I do it accidentally? What if something happens? And these absolutely terrifying thoughts that are so hard to say to anybody else because it makes you look like a bad mum. You can say them judgment free and get pointed in the right direction. And that literally saves people's lives. And they're just a great resource for people who have been through different kinds of perinatal mental health. So the kind of very, very severe depression, postpartum psychosis. So for me, OCD. They're just a really great source. It's the PANDAS Foundation, and yeah, I can't recommend them highly enough.
I think the main thing is that nothing is too big or small. I think it's the same as the Samaritans, really. Like, I remember it was when I was going through a really difficult time and I was speaking to Samaritans, I thought, you know, they don't want to hear me talking about it, like, it doesn't matter. And I remember they said on there, like, we are waiting for your call, and I was just like, wow, like, it's the same sort of thing, isn't it? It's like
PANDAS did a big push where it was like, am I bad enough to call, was I think the idea, and it was that. And I think maybe it's a British thing. I think maybe it's around the NHS because it's sort of free, but you don't want to take up resources that you think you're not worthy of, that you think that people more like worse off than you should be accessing. Not understanding that that's how you stop yourself getting to the point where you're one of those dire people. And so, am I bad enough to call was maybe you're in the first 2 weeks after giving birth, and it is baby blues, and it will lift, and it whatever. Just call someone. You're not going to hurt anybody by just talking and opening up, and being honest, and knowing that there's a community. I say of women, but I know dads go through it too, and the dads use the helpline a lot. That other people are going through similar things, and it can feel so scary and isolating. You know, I had my baby during COVID. There were no mum and baby classes or anything like that. I didn't see any other mums and babies. So you don't have that kind of village feel of, are you not sleeping? Does your baby scream all night long? Do you find breastfeeding absolutely excruciating? You know, all these things. And then they go, yeah, I do, or I did, but I do this now, and all these things. You don't get that shared experience, and so you bottle it up, and it just ferments, and it becomes harder and darker and far worse to find yourself to get out of it. It really does. So just talk more, just talk. I think that's the only thing that I wanted to do when I started talking on Instagram. Was just talk, be more honest, show all sides of motherhood. Don't just show the shiny matching outfits, gorgeous thing. You know, show the other bits, because the other women will then understand that they're okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, Kim, thank you so much. This has been just, I've learned so much from you, and thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story. I really can't recommend, like you said, PANDAS UK enough. I think also Kim's podcast, Confidence Brain, and you've got merch coming out now, I saw.
Oh my God, I know, it's ridiculous. It's sort of, I'm sort of doing it ironically, in case it doesn't tell you. But no, yeah, it's so stupid. But I came up with this little design, and I often have this saying that I say, not today, brain, because my brain will try and kick in and go, you need to do da-da-da-da, and I sort of go, not today, brain, I've got it. I'm in the driving seat. And other days I find that harder, and then sometimes I find it easier. But that kind of phrase, not today, brain. So yes, I teamed up with this this woman who runs a Welsh clothing line just by herself, and yeah, we've come up with some really gorgeous like sweatshirts and bags with not today brain. So yeah,
amazing. Well, yeah, that's great. And you've also got a Christmas film coming out. I don't know if is that like available for UK audiences, or
yes,
like is that coming out?
It's called A Very English Christmas. It's one of those super like cozy, warm nights in, super cheesy, makes no sense.
Love them.
You know the ones that that's out in December on Channel 5, and it's called A Very English Christmas.
Amazing. I'll definitely check it out. Kim, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.